Chapter 44-37. Hearing this, Fengjiu said apologetically, "It's all because of us that he ended up like this." Tianji shook his head again and smiled. "No, it's the will of the heavens that should be like this. It's his destiny to experience this death tribulation. What's more, this life and death tribulation is also a great secret to him. Not everyone can cultivate the initial stage of immortal body. This is also his blessing." Senior. Xianyuan Mose opened his mouth and looked at Tianji. "Senior, you can pry into the secrets of the heavens. Please give us some pointers. Where is our child now? Is he in danger? Where can we find him and bring him back?" Tianji smiled and shook his head again. "I just said that there are some things that you can't stop. This is the will of the heavens. With your strength, even if you find him, what can you do? The tribulation that they have to go through, the pain that they have to suffer. As the saying goes, if it's a blessing, it's not a disaster. If it's a disaster, it can't be avoided. Why insist on forcing it?" Hearing this, the two could not help but fall silent. Did this mean that they did not have to look for him? How could it be? Those were their children. They were still so young. How could they not look for him? Fengjiu paused for a moment, looked at him, and asked, "Senior, the Black Lotus of Destruction disappeared with the death of the Demon Lord. Has it also been destroyed between heaven and earth?" Tianji stroked his beard and smiled. "The Black Lotus of Destruction disappeared. Have you seen its seed?" Fengjiu's heart skipped a beat. He had a bad premonition. "What do you mean?" "That's an ancient object. Even if the Black Lotus flower is destroyed, it will eventually return to become a lotus seed. How can an ancient object be destroyed so easily?" Not seeing the lotus seed does not mean that the Black Lotus of Destruction no longer exists in this world. Tianji said slowly. Looking at their sudden change of expression, he smiled. "However, you don't have to worry. From a lotus seed to a lotus flower, it's not a day's work. What's more, the Black Lotus was destroyed under such circumstances. Perhaps, for hundreds of years, or even thousands of years, the Black Lotus will not appear in the world. It's just that." He paused, looked at the two, and said, "The heavenly Tao is the most changeable. Who can be sure? I can only say that everything is predestined." Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu realized that they had come with hope and expectation, but after listening to his words, they felt their hearts grow heavier. Tianji's words had a hidden meaning, but he didn't explain it clearly. It really made them feel uneasy, but they didn't have any clue. "Senior, it's not that the mandate of heaven can't be violated, and it's not that the heavenly Tao can't be changed. Now, we just want to know where our child is. Is it possible that you are in danger?" Xianyuan Mose asked in a low voice. He looked at Tianji with his deep eyes, wanting to get an answer. Seeing this, Tianji smiled. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked into the distance. He said, "Every night, I observe the stars. I can see the changes in the fate stars and the general trend of the world. They were originally people without fate stars and were not accepted by the heavens. However, when they were born, a strange phenomenon appeared in the heavens and they received the blessings of the 8 monarchs. Not long ago, 2 fate stars lit up in the sea of stars." Chapter 44-38. Hearing this, Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu looked at each other and secretly heaved a sigh of relief. No matter what, turning misfortune into blessing was a good thing. It's just that if you want to find them, it will be difficult. Tianji looked at the two and said, "The ancient blood incantation formation is no small matter. It's not something that can be broken through in a day. Moreover, this should be their calamity. Even if you want to protect them, you can't. But they are so young. Are we just going to do nothing? Fengzhou couldn't help but say. Tianjizi smiled and said, no, you are deeply related. After this parting, it won't be too long. Moreover, since you can find me here, I will naturally point out a way for you. Hearing this, Fengzhou was delighted and said, Senior, please enlighten us. Then I will use your fingertips as a guide. Tianjizi said and motioned for the two to reach out their hands. Seeing this, Xianyuan and Fengzhou immediately reached out their hands. With a wave of his hand, their fingertips were stung and a drop of blood seeped out. Tianjizi's hands formed a blood incantation formation and an ancient formation was formed under their feet. In the next moment, the formation flashed and turned into a drop of blood that flew into the sky. After a moment, the drop of blood fell down and disappeared. Tianjizi watched quietly until the drop of blood disappeared. Then he looked at the two and said, See. With the blood as a guide, no matter how I tell you the exact location, I can only narrow the scope of your search. He paused and said, Your children are now in the southeast of the lower realm. Follow this clue and find them. Hearing this, the two immediately cupped their hands and bowed. Thank you for your guidance, Senior. Tianjizi looked at the two and saw the joy on their faces. He paused for a moment and asked, Your current strength is at the peak of the Divine King realm, right? The two were slightly surprised and looked at him, not understanding the meaning of his words. Tianjizi smiled and said, Above the Divine King is the Supreme Being. This old man is looking forward to the time when you all reach the peak of the Supreme Being level. Xianyuan and Fengzhou looked at each other. They felt that his words today had a deeper meaning, and this deeper meaning was worth exploring. Thus, Xianyuan looked at him and said bluntly, Senior's words today seem to have a hidden meaning. Why don't you say it clearly? Tianjizi shook his head. It's not time yet. Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed. Seeing this, they didn't ask any further. Instead, they cupped their hands and said, Since that's the case, then we'll take our leave first. When we find a few children and return in the future, we'll bring them here to thank Senior. Go. Tianjizi looked at the two of them and said, Remember, let nature take its course. Everything has its own destiny. Goodbye. The two of them cupped their hands again and said. Then, they gathered their energy and flew into the air. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared into the sky. Watching them leave, Tianjizi stroked his beard and murmured, The phoenix star has appeared, and the deviant soul has entered the world. Breaking the 8 extremes of the heavenly way, you will become the master of the world. Fengzhou, you won't stop here. At this time, after Xianyuan and Fengzhou left, they went straight back to the Feng residence. They planned to inform their family members and planned a place to search. After all, after the incident, they had not personally returned to the Feng residence to explain. Their family members must be very worried. Chapter 44-39. Grandfather. Fengzhou called out and walked towards him. It's the two of you. Why didn't you say anything when you came back? Feng Sanyuan calmed down. Seeing that it was the two of them, he asked anxiously, Is there news of the 3 children? Xianyuan and Fengzhou looked at each other and said, We came here this time to tell you about the situation. We have some clues, but we haven't found them yet. Where did you come from? Feng Sanyuan asked, his gaze falling on them. Father, they just came back. Let them rest first. Feng Shao walked over from behind and said to Xianyuan and Fengzhou, Your grandfather is also worried about the children, but since you're here, let's rest first. I see that you're travel-worn. You must be exhausted. The children's whereabouts were unknown. In terms of worry, it was likely that the two of them were the most worried. Look, it had only been a few days, but they looked a lot more haggard. Hearing this, Feng Sanyuan also came back to his senses. Seeing that the two of them were indeed travel-worn, and their expressions were somewhat tired, he hurriedly said, Right, if you're tired, then rest first. Feng Zhou smiled slightly and said, We're fine. Actually, we went to Tianji to ask him for guidance. Although we haven't found the children yet, we more or less have some clues. To prevent them from worrying, Feng Zhou said, according to Tianji, even if the children are wandering outside, they will be able to turn misfortune into blessing. Grandfather and father, don't worry too much. We will go and look for them. If we find them, we will bring them back. She briefly explained the matter to them, and they arranged for her to rest first. Returning to the familiar courtyard, when only the two of them were left, Feng Zhou looked at Xianyuan and said, Say, what do you think Tianji meant by those words? Xianyuan shook his head and said in a deep voice, I can't guess what he meant, but since he didn't say it, let's pretend that we don't know. For now, let's find our children first. As for other things, we will know in the future. She reached out and hugged his waist, leaned her head on his shoulder, and said softly, I hope it's as he said, the children will be able to turn misfortune into blessing. They will. Xianyuan hugged her and looked at the sky. On the other side, Hao, Chen, and Yu followed Pan Ning to the imperial capital. Looking at the bustling imperial capital, as well as the officers and soldiers guarding the city gate, the three children leaned on the window of the carriage to look, and their eyes flashed. Pan Ning looked at the three of them and said with a smile, I'll take you to the mansion first. You must be tired from the journey. Rest well today. If you want to go out and play tomorrow, I'll have someone accompany you. Is there a lot of people in your family? Hao asked. He looked at him and said, If we go like this, will we cause trouble for you? Chapter 44:40. The two little ones were a little confused, so they looked at their elder brother. Hao didn't say anything after hearing what he said. He thought that since he was unfamiliar with this place, he might as well stay at his family's place for the time being. If their family was all right, then he would stay for the time being. If he left in the future, he could take out one or two things from his space to thank them. If they didn't live well, if their family was too complicated, then he would take his younger brother and sister out to find a place to live, and at the same time inquire about information and practice. But before that, the things in the space couldn't be shown to others. After all, every one of his mother's things were very precious, especially to mortals. They were not ordinary things. Pan Ning didn't know that at such a young age, after hearing his words, his mind had already spun a few rounds. Seeing that he was sitting quietly and didn't speak, he also smiled and lifted the curtain to look at the bustling street outside. Returning to a familiar place, his mood also soared. That brat of his family, he didn't know whether he was mischievous again after he left for so many days. On the way, Pan Ning introduced the place and area to the three of them, as well as some rules in the city. After that, he looked at the three children and said, At the foot of the imperial city, there is one thing you must remember. The three of them looked at him, waiting for his next words. Most of the people living in the imperial city are high officials and nobles. Moreover, at the foot of the imperial city, the patrols and guards are strict. If someone dies, they will be strictly investigated and dealt with. You must remember this point. When he said this, he looked at the three children. No one knew better than him how different these three seemingly harmless children were. Not to mention the elder one, just the twins, who were not even 3 years old, were able to escape from the hands of the human traffickers and even knew how to silence them. One could tell how different they were. Not to mention how, who killed more than 10 people at the drop of a hat. Although he was young, his strength was enough to shock even him. He was afraid that with his young age, if he were to live in the imperial capital, it would be troublesome if he were to get into a quarrel or fight with someone in the future and take someone's life without saying a word. Uncle Ning, are you saying that we can't casually kill people? Yu Er asked with a smile. Her soft voice had a sweet smile, pure and lovely. Yes. Pan Ning nodded. No matter what happens, remember not to kill anyone. If someone dies, the consequences will be very serious. Yu understands. We are good children, we won't casually kill people. She smiled, her pair of beautiful eyes curved as she softly said. Pan Ning's mouth twitched when he heard this. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. These 3 children were not ordinary children. In fact, he did not know whether it was right to bring them home. Would they cause any trouble for the Pan family? However, seeing that they were so young, if they were left alone, who knew what kind of trouble they would cause? Thus, it was better to have them by their side. Chapter 44-41. The 3 of them nodded seriously. In fact, they understood without him saying it. The carriage moved slowly until it turned into a quiet and secluded alley. After a while, it quieted down. Before they got off the carriage, they heard a child's excited voice. Daddy is back. Daddy is back. The 3 children in the carriage quietly lifted the curtain and looked out. They saw a 4 or 5-year-old boy running forward, followed by a beautiful woman and several servants. Pan Ning got off the carriage first and saw his son rushing over, so he picked him up. Son, come, let Daddy see if you've gained weight again. He smiled and picked up his son, pinching his chubby little face. He smiled and looked at the woman behind him, softly saying, Madam, I'm back. Husband. The beautiful woman smiled and came to his side, hurriedly calling, Ching Er, come down, your father is tired from the journey, how can you let him carry you again? Oh. The child responded and came down from his father's arms. With one hand held by his mother and the other hand holding his father, he excitedly said, Daddy, Daddy, let's go in quickly, I want to see the gift that Daddy bought for me. Wait a moment. Pan Ning smiled and touched his son's head. Then he looked at the still carriage, walked forward, lifted the curtain and smiled, come down quickly. The beautiful woman held her son's hand and looked at the carriage in surprise. She saw a little boy walk out first and jump off the carriage by himself. Then, he turned around and carried a little girl who looked less than 3 years old out of the carriage. Immediately after, a little boy who looked exactly the same as the little girl also got off the carriage by himself. Seeing the 3 children standing beside her husband, she couldn't help but be startled. She didn't know what to think, but her face turned pale and her body swayed slightly. Husband, they are? The woman asked, looking at Pan Ning with her beautiful eyes. Pan Ning saw her expression and knew that she was thinking too much. He smiled and came to her side. He held her waist and supported her, saying, Madam, don't think too much. This is not the place to talk. Let's go in and talk. Pan Ning's son didn't understand his mother's strange behavior. He was curiously looking at the 3 people in front of him with his eyes wide open. His gaze moved from to the 2 children who were younger than him but looked exactly the same. His face was full of curiosity. Let's go. Let me introduce you to the people in the mansion. Pan Ning looked at the 3 children and led them in. The servants in the mansion had already gone to inform the Pan family. Soon, the old master of the Pan family and the others knew that Pan Ning had returned with 3 children. Therefore, they all came to the front hall. Big brother, why are you home today? Is father here too? Pan Ning smiled and asked when he saw his elder brother walking out. It was a man who was a few years older than Pan Ning. He had a noble air with a bit of fierceness, which was a little different from Pan Ning's elegant gentleman. At this time, he stood with his hands behind his back. His gaze swept past Pan Ning and fell on Hao, and the other two. He was slightly surprised, but he didn't show it on his face. Chapter 44-42. What surprised him even more was the noble aura that these three children exuded, which shocked him even more. He was an important official in the court and had seen all kinds of people. However, even the princes and princesses in the palace could not compare to these three little children. The twins were still young. The little girl had a pair of pure and beautiful eyes, pure and cute. The little boy, on the other hand, had the look of an adult. His little face was taut, and his eyes were filled with scrutiny and inquiry. There was also the older boy, who looked to be about 8 or 9 years old, but his aura had already formed. It was like a sharp sword, fierce and intimidating. His aura was slightly cold, and his little face was cold and sharp. At this moment, he was also staring at him. While he was sizing him up, he was also sizing him up. After all, he was in a high position, and the aura he emitted was intimidating. Even an adult wouldn't dare to stare at him and size him up like this. However, these three children weren't alarmed, didn't panic, and actually dared to stare at him and size him up without batting an eyelid. This caused him to see them in a new light. I am on leave today. Father has just returned. He knows that you are home and will probably come over, he said as he withdrew his gaze from the three children. That's good. I brought these three children back. I can tell them and let them get to know each other. In the future, these three children will live in our house. Pan Ning said with a smile. He said to the madam beside him, bring the children in first. Let the servants prepare some pastries for them to eat first. Okay. The beautiful madam replied softly. After bowing slightly, she held her son's hand. Looking at the three children, she said gently, come in with me. Go to the front hall and rest. Seeing that the children were taken away, Pan Hong asked, what's going on? It's a long story. Oh, grandfather is here. Pan Ning saw the familiar figure slowly walking over. He could not help but smile and quickly went forward to support him. Grandfather, you are well informed. You know as soon as I enter the house. Pan Ning glanced at him and said, I heard that you brought three children back. That's why I wanted to come and see what's going on. He paused for a moment before continuing, don't tell me you've done something to betray Chiu Yi. Hearing this, Pan Ning was stunned, then laughed out loud, Grandfather, it's not like you don't know what kind of person I am. Besides, Chiu Yi and I are deeply in love, how could I do that kind of thing? This matter is really not what you think. He smiled and shook his head. He didn't expect his family to misunderstand. However, he didn't say anything else. He only said, I met these three children when I came back. They were separated from their family and couldn't remember where their home was, so I brought them back and temporarily let them stay in our house. This excuse isn't very clever, it's full of loopholes. The Pan family's eldest young master, Pan Hong, glanced at him indifferently, obviously not believing his words. The old man also glanced at him and didn't say anything. That glance clearly showed that he didn't want him to come up with any excuses to brush them off. Pan Ning smiled embarrassedly. At this moment, he saw his father coming. He immediately bowed and greeted, Father. Chapter 44-43. I'll tell you in detail when we get to the backyard. Let's go in first and introduce you to the three children. They'll be living in our house from now on. Pan Ning said and gestured for them to go in first. The three of them looked at each other and walked in. Pan Old Man and Pan Hong, who had arrived first and met the three children, walked in slowly and sat down at the front. Then, their gazes fell on the 3 children. Pan Old Man entered and saw the 3 children. His expression was the same as the previous 2, with surprise and surprise. It seemed that he didn't expect that the 3 children brought back by his youngest son would be like this. He glanced at the 3 people sitting upright and glanced at his youngest son before sitting down at the front. He, grandfather, father, eldest brother, madam, let me introduce you. Pan Ning stood in the middle of the hall with a smile and said to the people sitting there, these 3 children are siblings. This is the eldest brother, Xianyuan Hao, this is Xianyuan Mu Chen, and this is Xianyuan Mu Yu. As he spoke, his voice paused, and he turned sideways to introduce the 3 children. This is my grandfather, this is my father, this is my eldest brother, and this is my wife. Everyone in my family is here, except for my sister-in-law, who brought the 2 children back to her mother's house for a short stay and hasn't returned yet. Hearing this, the 3 children got down from their chairs and bowed to them in a well-behaved manner. They said in unison, greetings, great-grandfather Pan, grandfather Pan, Uncle Pan, Aunt Chiu. Pan Ning told them to address them on the way, so the 3 children greeted them according to his instructions. The people sitting there saw that the 3 children were so well-behaved and nodded with a smile on their faces. Pan family's ancestors saw that the twins were so well-behaved even though they were so young. He liked them and his face softened a little. He said to the 3 of them, Pan Ning has already told us that from today onwards, you can stay here. Just treat this place like your own home. And, since you're here, don't be shy and stay here at ease. Pan Old Man nodded and said. Pan Hong looked at the 3 children and paused for a moment. He said, if you lack anything or need anything, just tell Pan Ning and he will arrange it for you. Yes. The 3 children replied. Oh right, this is my son, Pan Bo Ching. You can play with him in the future. Pan Ning came to his son's side and touched his head. He asked with a smile, Daddy brought you a little friend, are you happy? Yes, I'm happy. My little brother and sister are so cute. The silly little boy grinned. He looked at Hao and said, Big brother is good-looking too. However, he looked cold. He didn't dare to look at him. Hearing this, Pan Ning couldn't help but chuckle and pinch his son's little face. Hearing this, some of the elders of the Pan family looked at Pan Ning while others drank their tea. However, they all listened attentively to see how he would arrange things and... Chapter 44-44. After all, the South Courtyard was the best courtyard in the Pan family. Usually, even if they received ordinary guests, they would not be arranged to stay in the South Courtyard. Only when they received important guests would they be arranged to stay in the South Courtyard. Who would have thought that Pan Ning would arrange the South Courtyard for 3 children to stay in today? It was really surprising, but it also made them even more curious. Who exactly were these 3 children? Old Master Pan glanced at Pan Ning, coughed lightly, and said, Chiu Yi, bring the children to familiarize themselves with the residence's environment. Then, see what they need to add and arrange it for them. Okay. Second Madam Pan responded. After bowing, she held her son's hand and said to Hao, and the other 2 warmly, the 3 of you, come with me. I'll bring you to see the courtyard. The 3 of them responded and bowed to the few people in the hall in a regular manner. Only then did they leave the hall. After they left, only the Pan family father and son were left in the hall. Looking at the people sitting upright, Pan Ning could not help but smile bitterly. He originally wanted to tell them in detail in the backyard, but it seemed that they had a lot to ask him. Tell us in detail. What exactly is going on? Old Master Pan picked up his teacup and took a sip of tea. He said slowly, don't try to trick us. Whether it's the truth or not, we'll know once we hear it. Pan Ning smiled helplessly and walked to the side to sit down. He said, "Grandfather, how would I dare to trick you? It's just that it's a long story." "Then take your time. We happen to have time today," Father Pan said and picked up his teacup. He looked like he was ready for a long chat. Seeing this, Pan Ning sighed silently and said, "I really don't know where to start." Hearing this, Pan Hong asked, "Who are they? Where did you know them?" Pan Ning glanced at his elder brother, waved his hands, and said with a smile, "You might not believe me if I tell you. I really don't know who they are, but I can tell you the last question. I met them in East City." However, when the three old foxes heard this, they could tell that there was a problem. What he said was that he could answer the last question. This was interesting. It seemed that he knew who these three children were, but he just didn't want to tell them. The three of them looked at each other, then looked away at the same time. Pan Ning drank his tea and did not notice the gazes of his grandfather, father, and brother. What about their families? Why didn't they go home? On the other hand, why did you bring them to your home? What's the reason? Pan Hong asked again. With Pan Hong asking questions, the two elders also drank their tea and listened from the side. They're looking for it too, but they're injured and hurt their heads. They can't remember where their house is. As Pan Ning spoke, he put down the teacup and looked at the three of them, saying, "These three children don't have any elders accompanying them to protect them. As you can see, the three of them don't look like children from ordinary families. Wherever they go, they will attract the attention of everyone." Chapter 44-45. Hearing his words, the three of them fell silent. That's right, from their point of view, they could naturally see that the three children were of extraordinary birth. They were definitely not children of ordinary families. However, to bring the three children back just like that, it seemed like, Pan Ning's father looked at him and said, "You know that raising three more children is not a big deal to our Pan family. However, what we are worried about is the identity and background of these three children. That is the most important thing. I don't know about their identity and background, but I know that they must be of extraordinary birth. That's why I want to help them when they are in trouble." Pan Ning looked at them with a serious and solemn expression and said, "Grandfather, father, eldest brother, there are some things that I can't tell you. However, please believe me, I know what I am doing." Hearing this, the three of them did not ask any more questions and only nodded. "Since you have said so, we won't ask any more questions. We also believe that you know what you are doing." Seeing that they did not ask any more questions, Pan Ning sighed in relief and said, "They will stay at home. I think that we will treat them as distant relatives. Moreover, I think that the three children will study with Qing, and the others under grandfather." Old Man Pan stroked his beard and nodded, saying, "Teaching one is still teaching, teaching a few more is still teaching. Those children seem to be very likable, so let them study with us." "Thank you, grandfather." Pan Ning hurriedly stood up and thanked him. Old Man Pan smiled and said, "We are all family. There is no need to be so formal." He stood up and said, "All right, I have to go back first. You see when they can bring Qing over." "Yes." Pan Ning replied with a smile. "I still have some things to deal with. You will have to take care of the three children." Pan Ning's father said and left. Pan Hong walked to his side and patted him on the shoulder, saying, "I have to pick up your sister-in-law and the children in a while. I will leave first." After watching them leave, Pan Ning stepped out of the hall and looked at the sky outside. His heart trembled slightly. The world was so mysterious. If he did not see it with his own eyes, how would he know that there were immortals in this world? If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, how could he have believed that the three young children could be so calm and meticulous in dealing with matters? It was just that he didn't know who their parents were. To be able to raise such outstanding children. When the three children stayed in the residence, they told the servants that they were the young master and young miss of the Pan family. Because of the Pan family's rules, the servants treated them with respect and didn't dare to be impudent. At night, Hao-er stood in the courtyard and looked at this elegant and quiet courtyard. No one knew what he was thinking. Mu-chin and Mu-yu walked out and saw him standing in the courtyard. They walked over and asked, "Brother, why are you standing here?" Hao-er looked at the two little ones and a smile appeared on his cold little face. "No, I was just thinking about something." He led the two of them inside and said, "The wind is strong at night. Don't catch a cold. Sleep early tonight. Uncle Ning said that tomorrow he will take us to the city to play." Yu-er said while beaming with smiles. In the room, Hao-er looked at them and asked, "What do you think of Uncle Ning?" Chapter 44-46. Hearing this, Hao-er held their hands and said seriously, "You two have to remember that although Uncle Ning is very good to us, you can't tell him our secret. Do you understand?" Mu-chin nodded and said, "I know." Yu-er beamingly smiled, and just like a little fox, she also nodded her head, Yu-er also knows. Big Brother had told us before, we must guard against people, Yu remembers. Yes, you can be unguarded, but you can't have the heart to harm others. Hao-er smiled and taught again. Yes, Yu-er remembers. The little one nodded with a smile. You can't take out the things in the space casually. You don't have to let others know. We have the space. You can't even tell Uncle Ning. You can't tell anyone about the cultivation method and martial arts that Big Brother taught you. He reminded them again. Yes. The two little guys nodded and listened carefully. Well, you two are tired. Go to bed early today. He acted like a little adult. He touched the two little guys' heads and let them go to bed first. Then Big Brother should go to bed early too. The two said. Okay. Hao-er watched them take off their clothes and go to bed. He helped them pull up the quilt and then turned outside and went to the room next door. Because they had to cultivate, there couldn't be too many servants walking around in the courtyard. Therefore, when they wanted to arrange for servants to come over and take care of them today, he refused. When he returned to the room, he didn't go to bed directly. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the bed and cultivated. He was the Big Brother. He was older than his younger siblings. Moreover, he remembered many things. However, there were some things he didn't tell the two little ones. There were no cultivators on this continent. In fact, he was afraid. He was afraid that his parents wouldn't be able to find this place, and he was also afraid that they wouldn't be able to go back. Fortunately, he knew the cultivation method and there were many cultivation books in the space. Therefore, he could only work hard to cultivate, hoping to become stronger so that he could find the way back with his younger siblings. The next morning, Pan Ning took the children out of the house in a carriage. Compared to the three children who sat in a regular distance, her children were like naughty children. Even when they sat in the carriage, they would not stop moving. The little boy rolled his eyes, and looking at Yu-er who was sitting properly, he couldn't help but move towards her side, and asked with a beaming smile, "Younger sister Yu-er, I am also Big Brother, do you want to call me Big Brother?" Yu-er blinked her beautiful eyes and looked at the little brother who was older than her. After thinking for a bit, she sweetly called out, "Big Brother Fu-ching." Hearing that soft and sweet voice calling him Big Brother Fu-ching, the little boy jumped up in excitement. "I'm a Big Brother too. I'm a Big Brother now." the little boy was very happy. He looked at Muchin expectantly and asked, "Brother Muchin, do you want to call me Big Brother?" Muchin glanced at him and looked away. "No." "Ah. Why? I'm obviously older than you." He scratched his head and looked at him with a puzzled expression. "If you don't want it, then don't." Muchin was also a little arrogant. Seeing this, Fu Qing thought for a bit and took out a candy from his pocket. "Call me Big Brother, and I'll give you candy." "I don't want it." Muchin glanced at her and then looked away. Chapter 44-47. When Pan Wuching saw that his father had asked him to sit down, he obediently ran to his side and leaned against him while looking at Muchin with his pair of eyes. Pan Ning first brought them to the city for breakfast, then took them out for a stroll around the city. He also brought the children back to buy some things. They only returned to the Pan residence in the evening. After sending the 3 children back to the southern courtyard, Pan Ning paused and said, It's not convenient for you to have no servants here. How about this? I'll call 17 over to follow you." He then added, 17 is the secret guard who followed me to the courtyard to look for you that day." Hao thought for a moment and nodded. "Okay. You guys should rest early today. Study with Qing tomorrow." Pan Ning smiled and said, "As for other matters, you don't have to worry about them. I'll help you find out." "Thank you." Hao bowed to him. Pan Ning nodded and then left first. The 3 children entered the room. Not long after, they heard a voice from outside. "Young Master Hao, I'm here to report." A young man in ordinary green stood in the courtyard and reported. The door opened and the 3 children walked out. Hao looked at the man in the courtyard and asked, "Did Uncle Ning tell you everything?" "Yes, young Master Hao. From today onwards, 17 will serve the 2 young masters and young mistress and listen to their orders," he said respectfully. Hao glanced at him and didn't say much. He just told him the rules. "If you stay here, you have to abide by my rules. Without our permission, no one is allowed to enter the courtyard. In addition, you can wait outside the courtyard. If there's anything, we'll call for you." "Yes," he replied respectfully. "You may leave," Hao said. Thus, after bowing, 17 left the room. At night, the 3 children did not go to bed early. Instead, under Hao's guidance, they sat cross-legged on the bed to cultivate. 17, who was guarding outside the courtyard, looked at the room with the lights on. His eyes flashed, and he could not help but think of what the second young master had told him in the evening. Second young master had instructed him to stay by their side and take care of them. He had also instructed him to do more and speak less. In the southern courtyard, no matter what the 3 children did or said, he had to keep an eye on them. However, he was not to speak of it to outsiders. Even if the masters of the Pan family asked, he was not to say much. Thinking of the second young master's instructions, he also knew that these 3 children had an extraordinary background. Naturally, he did not dare to be careless. In the room, Hao, who was cultivating with the 2 little ones, slowly opened his eyes in the middle of the night. He looked at the 2 little ones and called out softly, "Shen, you, When the 2 of them heard his voice, they opened their eyes and looked at him. The moment they opened their eyes, there was clarity in their eyes instead of confusion and sleepiness. "Big brother, what's wrong?" Yu asked while looking at him with her pair of beautiful big eyes. Chapter 44-48. Okay. The 2 nodded. Yu smiled and said, "Big brother, if you can't wake up tomorrow, you must wake us up." How smiled and patted her head. I will. You can sleep at ease. It doesn't matter if you forget to wake up tomorrow. I'll wake you up. N. You answered happily and yawned. She was a little sleepy. Let's sleep early. How said and left after letting them lie down. The next morning, before the sky was bright, How woke up Mu Chin and Mu Yu. The three of them practiced boxing in the courtyard. Compared to How's punches, Mu Chin and Mu Yu's punches were weak. However, they were still young, so How didn't have high requirements for them. He only let them practice until they were familiar with it. As for the rest, he would talk about it later. After sweating profusely and bathing, the three children ate breakfast and were about to go out when they saw the dignified Pan Buching trotting towards them. Big brother How, little brother Chin little sister Yu, I'm here to take you to school. The little guy bounced over, followed by a boy and a girl who were 2 or 3 years older than him. The girl was about 6 or 7 years old, and the boy seemed to be the same age as How. The two walked over and looked at the three with curiosity in their eyes. Brother Ching, are they the 3 people my father was talking about? Asked the boy. He walked up and looked at How and the others. It's them. This is. Pan Buching was about to speak but was interrupted by the boy. I'm Pan Bowen, and this is my sister, Pan Shui. My father is the eldest son of the Pan family. When we came back yesterday, my father already mentioned you. He said with a smile. You're Xianyuan How. You two are twins, Xianyuan Mu Chin and Xianyuan Mu Yu. Big brother Bowen, big sister Shui, you can call me Yu. The little one showed a sweet smile and looked at the two of them obediently. This is for you. The little girl with red face took out a wooden doll and handed it over to Yu. She seemed to be somewhat shy, and spoke in a low voice, but when she heard Yu, calling her big sister Shui, her pair of eyes flashed, and she was very happy. Yu's eyes lit up, and taking the gift she handed over, she said with a smile, Thank you big sister Shui. I also have gifts for you. Pan Bowen looked at How and Chen and said. He took out 2 small rectangular boxes from his arms and handed them to them. These are 2 brushes. Daddy bought them with me yesterday. They are for you. Thank you. How and Mu Chin took it and thanked him. Let's go to school. If you're late, great-grandpa will slap you. Pan Bowen said as he and Pan Buching led them to the school. The little girl with a red face shyly held Yu's hand. Seeing Yu smiling, she couldn't help but smile as well, and even her footsteps became lighter. When the children arrived at the school, Shui originally wanted to sit with Yu, but when she saw Mu Chin, who looked exactly like Yu, but had a sullen face, sitting next to Yu, she could only find a seat herself. Chapter 44-49. The old man walked in slowly with his hands behind his back. He glanced at the children who were sitting up straight in an orderly manner, then coughed lightly and asked, Do you all know each other? Yes, the children answered. The old man then walked down and said to Bowen, who was sitting on the left in front, Write down the book I asked you to memorize last time today. Yes, great-grandfather, Bowen answered in an orderly manner. He did not look back but began to grind the ink and write from memory. Shui, this is the writing you have to practice today. The old man gave her homework and walked over to Bo Ching. Practice your writing today. The homework is here. After giving the 3 children their homework, he walked over to How, and the other 2 and asked, Have you learned it before? What do you know? How thought for a moment and said, I don't really remember, but I remember that father and mother taught me before. Hearing this, the old man paused for a moment and asked, "Then do the three of you know how to write your names?" "Yes," the three of them said in unison. "Write it down and let me see." He pulled over a chair and sat between the three of them. He saw the three children pick up the brush, dip it in some ink, and seriously write down their names on the paper. Then, they handed it over one by one for him to see. Looking at the three names written by the three children, he looked at the three of them with some surprise. Heartwarming's handwriting had already begun to show its edge, and although the two younger ones wrote stroke by stroke, it was still regular and neat. It did not seem like the handwriting that they would write at their age. After all, they were such young children. However, when he thought of the unique temperament of these three children, he felt that it was not surprising. Your writing is not bad. Today, I'll test you first and see what you know." He looked at the three children, thought for a moment, and tested them one by one. However, what he did not expect was that this school exam was full of surprises. The three children knew more than he expected, especially who could memorize a book he had never read. His photographic memory really shocked him. Of course, Old Man Pan would never have guessed that it was because was an immortal. His spiritual power was not something a mortal could compare to. Moreover, he had been intelligent since he was young, so he could learn twice the result with half the effort. After a whole morning, Old Man Pan couldn't help but feel a sense of appreciation for talent. He discovered that not only but even the two children who weren't even 3 years old had extremely good memories. They understood with just a hint, and their comprehension abilities were even more astonishing. "That's all for today, you can go back. Do your homework well. I'll check on you one by one tomorrow." The old man told them to go back first. The next few days passed as usual. However, learned things extremely quickly. Even Bowen could not catch up to his speed. Moreover, not only did he learn to read and write, but he also learned to paint. On this day, after the old man left school, he walked slowly to the front and met Pan Hong. After Pan Hong bowed, he asked, "Why haven't I seen Pan Ning recently? What has he been busy with these days?" Chapter 4450. Hearing this, the old man frowned. "What's he doing there?" "I don't know." Pan Hong paused, then asked, "Grandfather, how are and the others doing?" Grandfather Pan glanced at him. "They're naturally intelligent and have a photographic memory. They can be called demonic geniuses." Pan Hong's eyes flashed. "All three children are like that?" "Yes." The old man nodded and sighed. An ordinary family wouldn't be able to raise such an outstanding child. "I really don't know who they are. I'm getting more and more curious." Pan Hong smiled and said, "Perhaps, we will find out one day." To be honest, he was also curious about the origins of the three children. However, they were brought back by his brother. Even if he was curious, he didn't think of investigating in secret. After all, he believed that his brother had a sense of propriety. When it was time to let them know, they would know. "Yes, I heard from your father yesterday that His Majesty seems to want to send you on a long trip." Grandfather Pan asked. "There was talk of it, but it hasn't been confirmed yet. If you have to go on a long trip, you have to arrange for people to follow you. Safety is the most important thing." He patted him on the shoulder and said, "I'll go back and rest first. If you encounter something you can't solve, discuss it with your family." "Grandfather, don't worry. I will," Pan Hong said and watched him leave before heading to the backyard. The days passed unknowingly. In the blink of an eye, and the others had been in the Pan family for more than 3 months. Compared to Mu Chin and Mu Yu, Heartwarming's cultivation improved faster. However, in this place, the spiritual energy was scarce. Although there were pills to improve strength in the space, he didn't dare to use them casually. Early in the morning, the Pan family was sitting in a circle eating breakfast. It was peaceful and quiet. However, they were caught off guard by a sudden piece of news. Not good, not good. Old master, something happened to first young master. The steward hurried in to report. Behind him, 2 secret guards covered in blood carried the bloodied Pan family's first young master, Pan Hong. Grandfather Pan, who was eating breakfast, stood up abruptly when he heard the housekeeper's report. The bowl in his hand fell to the ground. His heart pounded. What happened? What happened? However, as soon as he finished speaking, he saw his eldest grandson being carried by the secret guard. He felt his blood rush to his head and his entire body swayed. He almost lost his balance. Husband. Father. Father. The expressions of Pan Hong's wife and child changed abruptly, and they hurriedly ran forward. However, when they saw the wounds on his body and the blood all over his body, tears fell from their eyes. How could this be? How could this be? Husband. Hong. Pan Fu helped old Master Pan to the front. When he saw Pan Hong covered in injuries, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Quickly get a doctor. Quick. Pan Ning woke up late today and didn't have breakfast with them, but after hearing the news of his big brother's accident, he quickly rushed over. As for Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu, who were in the southern courtyard, they were used to eating by themselves, so they didn't know what had happened earlier. The servants of the Pan residence also didn't tell them about the eldest young master's accident. After all, in everyone's eyes, they were just 3 children. Chapter 44-51. Seeing the doctor shaking his head as he walked out, Old Man Pan's entire body swayed and his vision turned black. He fainted. Father. Old Man Pan was shocked and quickly supported him while shouting, Doctor, quickly take a look at my grandfather. Pan Ning quickly walked out and pulled the doctor who had just walked out of the room. The doctor sighed in his heart and returned to check Old Man Pan's pulse. He then took out some medicine and placed it under Old Man Pan's nose for him to smell. He then pressed on Old Man Pan's Renjong point and said, Old Master is fine. He just fainted from the shock. He's getting on in years, so you should send him back to rest first. Is there really no hope for Hong? Doctor, you must save him. You must save him. Old Man Pan woke up and held the doctor's hand as he pleaded. Sigh. Eldest young master's lungs have been injured, and he has lost too much blood. Not only that, but the tendons in his legs have also been severed. This person is trying to kill him. With such serious injuries, this old man is really powerless. The doctor sighed and withdrew his hand. He cupped his hands towards them and turned to walk out. Hearing the doctor's words, the Pan family's faces turned pale with grief and sorrow. Pan Hong's wife covered her mouth and sobbed beside the bed. How could this be? How could this be? Old Man Pan sat down and muttered in disbelief. Pan Ning clenched his fists and refused to give up. I'll go to the city to find other doctors. Father, immediately go to the palace to explain the situation to the emperor and ask for an imperial doctor to treat Big Brother. Yes. I'll go to the palace to ask for an imperial doctor immediately. Old Man Pan heard Pan Ning's words and recovered from the shock. He quickly stood up and walked out. I'll go to the palace to ask for an imperial doctor immediately. Madam, please send grandfather back to the courtyard to rest. Pan Ning looked at his wife and said. No, I want to stay here. I'm not leaving. Old Man Pan said, unwilling to leave. He was worried that if he left, he wouldn't be able to see his grandson for the last time. I'll stay here and take care of him. If all of you go out, someone will have to look after him. Pan Ning's wife said softly. All right, then I'll leave the manor to you. I'll go out now. As for sister-in-law, you. Pan Ning gestured and looked at his sister-in-law who was sobbing in the inner room. You go. I'll stay here, she said as she watched him leave. She poured a cup of water for the old man and went into the inner room. She crouched down and hugged her, comforting her. How? Who was it that did this? Pan, old Pan they. Of course, the children of the Pan family were also sensible. Although they were brought back to the courtyard, they didn't say a single word, but tears continuously fell from their eyes. Pan Bo Ching, who was usually the most mischievous, saw Bowen and Shua crying silently. He couldn't help but wipe his tears. He pursed his lips and said, Big brother, little sister, don't cry. My father and grandfather have already gone to find a doctor. Uncle will be fine. Chapter 44-52. Sister, don't cry, don't cry. Fu Qing did not know how to coax people. Seeing her crying more and more sadly, and his elder brother also had his head lowered, he could not help but cry as well. He wiped his tears and ran out. Hao and the other two were still in the courtyard and had not been discharged. In addition, the south courtyard was rather secluded. The servants in the front were moving about chaotically, but the south courtyard was still quiet and elegant. 17 was waiting outside. Because he had heard the news from the other secret guards, he was also anxious and worried at this time. How was the eldest master now? Just as he was thinking, he saw Fu Qing crying and wiping his tears as he walked over. He quickly went forward and called out, Master Qing, what's wrong with you? Fu Qing glanced at him and ignored him. He continued to cry as he walked towards the south courtyard. Seeing this, 17 hurriedly came to the entrance of the southern courtyard and said, Young Master Hao, young Master Qing is here. Sob sob, sob sob. Fu Qing walked in as he cried. He stood in front of the three people and could not stop crying. In the courtyard, Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu could not help but look at each other. Yu, could not help but ask, Brother Fu Qing, why are you crying? Did Uncle Ning hit you? Sob sob. No, no, sob sob. Fu Qing sobbed as he cried. Then what's wrong with you? Mu Chen asked. He really could not bear to see this boy, who was a head taller than him, crying non-stop. Sob sob. My uncle is going to, sob sob. He's going to die, sob 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 that he said intermittently, sob sob. I told big brother and Shua, little sister Shua, that uncle will be fine, but uncle has a lot of blood on his body, and he won't wake up. The servants in the residence are all saying that uncle is going to die, sob sob sob. I don't want uncle to die, I don't want uncle to die, sob sob. Hearing this, Mu Chen and Mu Yu were stunned. Uncle Hong, who had a cold face but would send them things, was going to die. Hao frowned as his cold little face darkened. He looked at 17 who was standing at the side and asked, what happened? Eldest young master was ambushed on his way back. The bodyguards accompanying him were all killed. The secret guards tried their best to save him, but I heard that his injuries were very serious. The doctor said that he might not live past tonight. 17 quickly told him what he knew. Hearing this, Hao was silent and didn't say anything. No one knew what he was thinking. Boo-hoo. Big brother and Shue. Little sister Shue kept crying. I'm scared too. Boo-hoo. Fu Qing sobbed softly. Big brother Bo Qing, don't cry, Uncle Hong will be fine. Yu tiptoed and lightly patted his head. Shen you Hao looked at the two of them. Go and accompany Bowen and Shue. Where's big brother? Mu Chen looked at him and asked. Hao thought about it and said, I'll go take a look at Uncle Hong. Okay. Mu Chen nodded and said to Bo Qing, don't cry. Boys shouldn't cry. 17, bring them over. Hao looked at 17 and ordered. Yes. 17 responded and left with the three little ones. Chapter 44-53. Hao Pan Ning was a little surprised to see him here. However, he was in a hurry to bring the doctors to treat his elder brother, so he did not stop walking. As he walked forward, he said, something happened in the residence. If you need anything, look for 17 first. Hao followed beside him and said, I heard that something happened to Uncle Hong, so I wanted to come and take a look. Elder brother was ambushed on the way back. His condition is not good. I'm bringing the doctors to treat him now. As Pan Ning spoke, his footsteps were hurried. He said to the dozen or so doctors who were jogging behind him, everyone, please walk faster. The doctors behind him were in a hurry and were panting slightly. One of the fatter ones was sweating a lot. He was wiping his sweat and panting as he jogged to follow the crowd. When they arrived at the courtyard, before they could catch their breath, they were invited in for a diagnosis. However, after entering, they all came out shaking their heads. There are too many injuries and they have hurt his lungs. Forgive us for not being able to do anything. As they spoke, they did not dare to ask for a consultation fee and left on their own. The dozen or so doctors came quickly and left quickly. Pan Ning did not even have the strength to stop them as he watched them leave. He looked at his elder brother on the bed and stood there in a daze. His eyes could not help but redden. Outside, Hao listened to the doctor's words and was silent for a while. Just as he was about to walk in, he saw Pan Ning's father hurrying over with two old men. He retreated to the side and watched them enter before following in. I've brought 2 imperial doctors. Quick, please save my eldest son. Pan Ning's father hurriedly said and pulled the 2 imperial doctors forward. Let us catch our breath first. The 2 old men who were pulled in hurriedly were out of breath. After they steadied themselves, they took a few deep breaths before looking at the person on the bed. They were no strangers to Pan Hong. However, when they saw Pan Hong lying on the bed with a pale face and an extremely weak breath, the 2 imperial doctors looked at each other and sighed in their hearts. With just one look, they knew that young Master Pan was most likely doomed. Even so, the 2 of them did not say much. They just went forward and seriously checked his pulse. The members of the Pan family watched from behind with their hearts in their mouths. Due to their nervousness, their palms were sweating. More than 10 of the best physicians in the city had come, and all of them had said that there was no hope. Now, they could only place their hopes on these 2 imperial physicians. If even they couldn't do anything about it, then it was really. Hao saw that the old master was so nervous that his body was trembling. The others were also worried. They looked at the 2 imperial physicians with nervous and hopeful gazes. He pursed his lips and looked away. In his memory, his mother had taught him some simple medical skills. In addition, he could feel that Pan Hong's aura was extremely weak from the moment he came in. His face was also faintly covered with a layer of death aura. A mortal's aura was so weak that he could die at any time. If there was no divine medicine, it could be said that he was dead for sure. He had life-saving medicinal pills in his space. However, if a person who had been sentenced to death survived because of his medicinal pills, he thought that there would be a lot of trouble in the future. Moreover, if they knew that he had a life-saving pill, it was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't become greedy. Chapter 44-54. No one in the room made a sound because of the imperial physician's diagnosis. The two imperial physicians shook their heads and said, "There are a total of 27 wounds on eldest young master's body. The most serious one was a sword stab to the heart. He's just hanging on with one breath. He won't be able to make it through tonight. You'd better prepare for his funeral." They sighed and shook their heads. Just as they were about to walk out, one of the imperial physician's legs was hugged by eldest madam, who had fallen to the side. "No, my husband won't die. I beg you to save him. He won't die. He won't abandon us. I beg you, please save him." Eldest madam cried and begged, refusing to let them go. In her opinion, if they left as well, then no one would be able to save her husband. Her pleas were filled with grief and sorrow. Even the two imperial physicians could not help but feel sorrowful at this moment. Pan Hong was in the prime of his life and was highly regarded by the emperor. Now that he was in this state, it really made people sigh. "Eldest madam, please restrain your grief," they said helplessly as they watched the woman cry herself to death. In the end, she fainted. Sister-in-law! Sister-in-law! Pan Ning and his wife quickly went forward to support her. The imperial physician looked at her and said, "She's too sad. Send her back to rest. We'll take our leave first." The two of them said and walked out. They still had to report Pan Hong's condition to the emperor. Old Master Pan's body swayed and his face was as white as paper. Just as he was about to fall, however, supported him. Father Pan sat in a chair in a daze. He seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. "Madam, send sister-in-law back and take good care of her." Pan Ning forced himself to stay awake and let his wife send her back first. When he saw his wife and servants supporting his sister-in-law leave, he took a deep breath and looked at his elder brother on the bed with grief in his eyes. Old Master Hao supported him as he trembled to the bedside. Looking at his dying grandson, he couldn't help but cry. He said in a choked voice, "Why can't I be the one lying here instead of dying before my grandson?" Unable to bear the impact of this grief, the old man, who had been holding on for a long time, finally collapsed. His body twitched, and his mouth was slightly crooked. Saliva flowed out from the corner of his mouth, shocking the father and son of the Pan family. "Grandfather! Father!" Father Pan and Pan Ning quickly stepped forward to support him, fearing that something would happen to him. Father Pan hurriedly said, "Quickly send your grandfather back and let the doctor take a good look at him. Your eldest brother is already like this, we can't let anyone fall in our house." However, watched as the room turned into a mess after the old master collapsed. He retracted his gaze, and with a flick of his hand, he stuffed a pill between his fingers into the mouth of the dying Pan Hong. He moved so quickly that no one noticed that he had stuffed a pill into Pan Hong's mouth. After old Master Pan was sent back to the courtyard, the room became quiet again. Old Master Pan turned around and walked to the bedside with heavy steps. Looking at his son who was on the verge of death, he couldn't help but cover his face and cry softly. Chapter 44-55. When Father Pan heard his words and thought of Pan Hong's injuries, he wiped away his tears and said, "The doctors all said that he won't live. They only treated his wounds simply. Even if he can't live, I have to let him go with dignity. Hao helped by the side. He asked someone to bring a basin of water and help to clean the wounds again. When he saw Pan Ning's father taking out medicine to treat Pan Hong's wounds, he hurriedly handed over the medicine he had prepared. Grandpa Pan, use this medicine of mine. It's very good for external injuries. Hao said as he handed the medicine bottle to him. Father Pan glanced at him and nodded. He didn't say anything else as he carefully applied medicine on Pan Hong's wounds and bandaged them up. Hao frowned slightly as he looked at the broken tendons on his feet. He could take out healing pills for him to consume, and he could also take out medicine to treat his external injuries. However, there was nothing he could do to help with his broken hamstring. If his mother was here, he thought that there would be a way. Unfortunately, he didn't know where his parents were. Father. Pan Ning walked in and saw his father sitting by the bed with a sorrowful face and Hao standing at the side. His footsteps paused for a moment before he walked in. Father, let me guard big brother here. He was really worried that he wouldn't be able to withstand the impact and collapse. No, I want to guard here. Pan Ning's father shook his head, unwilling to leave. Seeing this, Pan Ning sighed softly and said to Hao, you go back first. Hao responded. He glanced at Pan Hong on the bed before turning around and walking out. Hao didn't return to the courtyard directly. Instead, he went to Bowen and the others. When he entered the courtyard, he saw Mu Chen and Mu Yut sitting around the stone table with Bowen, Bo Qing and Shui 17 was standing at the side. Big brother. Yu saw him and hurriedly ran to his side. She looked up at him worriedly and asked, Big brother, how is Uncle Hong? Is he better? Hao looked at his sister beside him and couldn't help but reveal a doting smile. He reached out and patted her little head. Don't worry, Uncle Hong will be fine. He's just too tired and slept for a while. Hearing this, the eyes of Yu shone, and she happily smiled. That's good, like this big brother Bowen and big sister Shui won't be without a father. Hearing Hao's words, 17 sighed in her heart. They were still young and did not understand how serious the injury was. His brother, who was also a secret guard, told him that even the imperial physician had come and said that the eldest young master was beyond saving. Furthermore, he would not be able to survive the night. Big brother Bowen, big sister Shui you don't need to worry. My big brother said that Uncle Hong will be fine, he is just tired, and will be fine after sleeping. Yu said while looking at them with a beaming smile. Snow's red and swollen eyes held a glimmer of hope, while Bowen lowered his head and said nothing. Because of this incident, the adults in the residence also collapsed one after another. Hao and the other two stayed here to accompany the children of the Pan family. It was only at night that Hao and the other two returned to the southern courtyard. Chapter 44-56. Yes. Hao responded and said, we are indebted to their family. There are medicines in the space that can save his life, so I secretly fed him one. Hao continued, however, the tendons in his legs were severed. I'm afraid that after he recovers, his legs will be crippled. Big brother, didn't you say that mother's medical skills are amazing? When we find father and mother in the future, won't we get mother to treat Uncle Hong? Yu blinked her beautiful eyes, her little face full of innocence. If mother was here, his injuries wouldn't be a big problem. However, mother isn't here now, so it's hard to say what will happen in the future. As Hao spoke, he saw the two of them looking at him and continued, however, it's already considered good that he's still alive. Those imperial physicians and physicians had already said that he would definitely die. Now that he's still alive, it shouldn't matter even if he can't stand up. Compared to death, at least he was still alive. In his opinion, this was already considered lucky. Great-grandfather Pan couldn't take the blow and collapsed. He probably won't be able to teach during this period of time. From tomorrow onwards, you two can study on your own. If you encounter anything you don't understand, just ask me. How? Reminded them. Yes, yes. The two little ones nodded in response, looking very obedient. This night was difficult for the Pan family. Other than the collapsed great-grandfather and great-madam, the rest of the Pan family, including the children, were gathered in the side room. They called Bowen and Shue because they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to see their father for the last time. The two children stayed by the bed, their small hands holding their father's large hands. They didn't dare to cry or make a fuss. They just kept looking at him. In their hearts, they hoped that their father was just as Hao said. He fell asleep because he was tired. Perhaps he would wake up at dawn tomorrow. All the powers in the imperial capital had heard about what happened to the Pan family. They knew that the Pan family's eldest young master, Pan Hong, was ambushed on his way back. His injuries were so severe that even the imperial physicians said that he wouldn't live past tonight. On one hand, they were shocked that someone dared to make a move on the Pan family's eldest young master. On the other hand, they felt sorry for Pan Hong. Such an outstanding person was going to die at such a young age. It really made one sigh. In the palace, after the imperial physician reported the situation and said that Pan Hong would not survive the night, the emperor flew into a rage and ordered that the person behind the ambush must be found. When night fell, the emperor left the palace with 12 guards and went to the Pan family. "Old master, second young master, His Majesty is here." The housekeeper quickly ran into the courtyard to report. Hearing this, Father Pan and Pan Ning quickly went out to greet him. As soon as they came out, they saw a middle-aged man walking over with steady steps, followed by more than 12 inner palace guards. "Your subjects greet your Majesty." The father and son of the Pan family stepped forward and knelt on one knee. "No need to be so courteous." The emperor stepped forward to support Father Pan. Looking at Father Pan, who had aged 10 years overnight, he couldn't help but sigh softly and said, "This emperor is here to see Pan Hong." "Many thanks, Your Majesty," the father and son of the Pan family said as they led him into a side room. When he came to the inner room, he saw Pan Hong's son and daughter standing by the bed with tears in their eyes. His footsteps paused. He originally wanted to take a step forward, but he couldn't. He just stood 3 meters away from the bed and looked at them. Chapter 44-57. After a long while, he stepped forward and walked to the bedside. He glanced at the person on the bed before shifting his gaze to the two children. "What are your names?" the emperor asked as he looked at the two children. "Your Majesty, my name is Pan Bowen." "My name is Pan Shue." Shue replied timidly when she saw her brother speak. Hearing this, the emperor nodded. He patted the two children's heads and said, "I will catch the person who harmed your father." He thought that when he returned, he would have to think carefully about how to compensate the Pan family and the two children. After all, Pan Hong had been ordered by him to go on a long journey. The fact that he had been killed on this trip was probably related to what he had done. He didn't stay in the Pan family for long. After comforting the Pan family, he left quietly. After all, with his status, it wasn't easy for him to take the risk to come out at night. After sending off the emperor, the Pan father and son continued to keep watch in the side room. However, in the middle of the night, the two children fell asleep by the side of the bed. After Pan Ning ordered someone to send the children back to rest, he suddenly noticed that his pale-faced brother's breathing seemed to have gradually stabilized. He was stunned and his heart tightened. He was afraid that it was just his imagination. He quickly walked to the outer room and held his father's hand. "Father, father, big brother is..." Before he could finish, Pan Ning's father, who had been sitting in a daze, suddenly stood up and interrupted him. Did your big brother die?" he asked in a trembling voice as tears welled up in his eyes. No, father, come and see. Big brother's breathing seems to have stabilized. Come and see." Pan Ning excitedly pulled him to the side of the bed. Pan Ning's father went forward to take a look. He couldn't help but be stunned. He was so emotional that he couldn't speak. This, doctor. Quick. Get a doctor. That night, the lights in the courtyard were lit all the way until the next day. When First Madam woke up at dawn, she looked at the sky outside and sat in a daze. Her expression was sorrowful. In the next moment, she covered her face and cried bitterly. When Second Madam came in and saw her crying, she hurriedly went forward. Sister-in-law, what happened to you?" "Chiu-yi, I didn't even get to see him for the last time." I. Woo. She covered her face and cried bitterly. Her cries were so sorrowful that it made one's heart ache. When Second Madam heard this, she hurriedly said, "Sister-in-law, don't cry. Eldest uncle is fine. Eldest uncle is still alive." "What?" First Madam, who had been covering her face and crying bitterly, stopped crying when she heard this. She stood up agitatedly, grabbed her hand, and asked in a trembling voice, What did you say? Is my husband still alive?" Second Madam hurriedly told her about what happened last night. As soon as Second Madam finished speaking, she cried and laughed as she hurriedly put on her coat and ran out. At this time, several doctors were taking Pan Hong's pulse in the room. When they felt the strong beating pulse, they all widened their eyes in shock as if they had seen a ghost. Their faces were full of disbelief as they muttered, "This is a miracle, this is a miracle. How did he survive with such injuries? This is simply unbelievable." When Pan Ning and Pan Father heard this, their faces were filled with excitement. Pan Ning asked with uncertainty, "Doctor, is my big brother really okay? Did he really survive?" Chapter 44-58. That's right. I've never seen anyone who could survive with such injuries. It's impossible to survive with such injuries. When we left yesterday, he was clearly hanging on to his last breath. But now, his pulse is beating vigorously, and his whole body has recovered. It's really incredible, really incredible. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. Another doctor added. An old doctor who had been silent all this time stroked his beard and withdrew his hand from taking the pulse. He looked at the Pan father and son and asked, "Yesterday, his injuries were so serious, but today, he has almost recovered. May I ask Master Pan, second young master, what miracle medicine did you give to eldest young master?" Master Pan was startled and shook his head. "How could we have any miracle medicine? Yesterday, even the imperial physicians came. Whether it was you or the imperial physicians, they only looked at him and left without prescribing any medicine. How could you have given him any medicine? Tomorrow, they would all say that he would not survive. No one would even prescribe him any medicine. Even the wounds on his body were simply treated. He had to personally clean them up and apply new medicine. Since the incident yesterday, he had been guarding this room and no one had given him any medicine. That's strange. Eldest young master's injuries were almost healed overnight. This doesn't seem to be self-healing. But if there's any medicine that can cure eldest young master's injuries, this old man has never heard of it in all my years as a doctor. If there is, it can only be the legendary elixir of the gods. He seemed to be muttering to himself. Unexpectedly, when Pan Ning heard this, his heart trembled. His eyes narrowed as if he had thought of something. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he looked up again, he sighed and said, "Yesterday, my father and I were guarding this room. If there was any miracle medicine, we wouldn't have started preparing for my brother's funeral." Hearing this, the other doctors nodded. They also knew about this. Last night, the Pan family had already started preparing for the funeral. But in the second half of the night, Pan Hong's condition gradually improved. If there is, then it's because of His Majesty's good fortune and the chi of the true dragon that my brother escaped death. When he said this, Pan Ning's face was filled with gratitude and awe. He even bowed respectfully in the direction of the imperial palace. Hearing this, the doctors were startled and carefully asked, "Could it be that the emperor came last night?" "That's right. Other than the people from the Pan family, His Majesty also came to visit my brother last night. Not long after His Majesty left, my brother's aura gradually stabilized. I think this must be due to His Majesty's protection," Pan Ning said excitedly. The doctors looked at each other. They were a little surprised and a little uncertain, but in the end, they all felt that maybe it was really like this. Otherwise, how could it make sense? Pan Ning said excitedly, his face full of gratitude. Even Father Pan believed him, saying repeatedly, "When Hong recovers, he must kowtow to His Majesty to thank His Majesty for his kindness." After the doctors prescribed the medicine, the servants sent the doctors away. In less than half a day, another piece of news spread outside. Pan Hong, the eldest son of the Pan family, who was originally said by the doctors and imperial physicians to be unable to live past last night, actually survived. As the news spread, the legend of His Majesty's visit to the Pan family last night and the chi of the true dragon that saved the eldest son of the Pan family from death's door also spread. Chapter 44-59. So you're saying that Pan Hong survived? The emperor looked at the people below and asked. "Your Majesty, it is said that he survived. The doctors in the city have seen him and his pulse has stabilized. However, I heard that the tendons in his legs were severed. Even if he survives, I'm afraid he won't be able to stand up again." Hearing this, the emperor was silent for a moment, then said, "Have the imperial physician go to the Pan family again. No matter what, his injuries must be treated." "Yes, sir." The person below responded, bowed, and then left. After a while, the emperor looked at the old man hidden in the shadows and asked, "What do you think is going on?" "Last night when I went to see Pan Hong, I clearly saw that his breathing was very weak and that he would not survive. Why did I hear that he survived today?" The old man walked out from the shadows and clasped his hands in front of him. He slightly leaned forward and respectfully said, "The doctors in the city and the imperial physician in the palace all made the same diagnosis. Moreover, the injury to his lungs is not something that can be cured by ordinary medicine. Now that Pan Hong has survived, it is clear that after your Majesty left, he must have taken some life-saving medicine." "Medicine?" The emperor was slightly startled. He looked at him and asked hesitantly, "In this world, does medicine really exist?" The emperor did not believe the rumors that were spread outside about him being protected by the true dragon and son of heaven. Last night, he only went to take a look. Even if there was a true dragon and son of heaven protecting him, it could not have reached Pan Hong. The old man's eyes moved slightly as if he remembered something. He slowly said, "In this world, there are immortals, so naturally there are medicine. However, if not for a great opportunity, even if an immortal appeared in front of us, we would not be able to recognize their true form. Oh. Hearing this, the emperor was immediately interested and asked, "Could it be that you have seen it before? Are those immortals as powerful as the legends say? Can they fly in the sky, burrow into the ground, move mountains and overturn seas?" The old man smiled and said, "I don't dare to hide it from your majesty. When I was 4 or 5 years old, I once saw a white-robed immortal flying on a sword. That immortal's grace is still vivid in my mind. There really are immortals in this world." His Majesty's eyes widened, unable to hide his excitement. "Where did you meet them? Why have I never heard you mention it?" No one knew how excited and expectant the emperor was on this day. It was the first time he had heard about immortals, and the people he trusted had personally confirmed the existence of immortals in this world. His heart couldn't help but jump. Immortals. That was an existence that even the emperor couldn't compare to. Even though he was the emperor and was in charge of a dynasty, his lifespan was only 100 years. In fact, he might not even be able to live to 100 years old. After all, it was already rare for ordinary people to live to 60 or 70 years old, and it was even rarer to live to 100 years old. He was in a high position and held power in his hands. Naturally, he hoped that his lifespan would be endless and he would live as long as the heavens. If he had the help of an immortal or if they gave him a pill that could increase his lifespan, then, thinking of this, his heart suddenly became excited, and a thought faintly formed in his heart. Meanwhile, at the Pan residence. Since Pan Hong's condition had stabilized, the Pan family heaved a sigh of relief. No matter what, to them, Pan Hong's survival was more important than anything else. Chapter 4460. He knew that his elder brother could survive this time because of how, those 3 children were not ordinary children. Even if they did not say anything, he could guess. After all, a person who had been sentenced to death by the doctor and the imperial physician, who said that he could not be saved, survived overnight. Moreover, his internal injuries were almost healed. Others did not know what was going on, but he knew. He just did not expect that the 3 children were so capable, and even more did not expect that they would be willing to risk being discovered to save his elder brother. He was grateful, but at this time, he was conflicted. Should he go and thank the 3 children? If he did not go, he would always feel that he owed them a big thank you. If he went, he remembered that how, did not tell him. It was obvious that he did not want him to know. If he went, wouldn't he? He hesitated between going and not going, but he could not tell others. He could not help but sigh softly. Forget it. Since they did not want him to know, he would pretend not to know. He would remember this life-saving grace in his heart for the time being. If there was a chance in the future, he would repay it. After freshening up in the yard and resting for a while, Pan Ning went to the south yard. Standing outside the southern courtyard, he saw the 2 little ones practicing their fists with Hao, by their side, guiding them. His eyes flashed. "Young Master Hao, second master is here," 17 reported. Uncle Ning. Seeing him, Yu was beaming with smiles, then trotting to his side, she asked, "Uncle Ning, is Uncle Hong well?" Pan Ning smiled and said, "The doctor said that his life is no longer in danger." He looked at Hao and said, "During this period of time, the old man will not be able to teach you." He was shocked and fell down, but he is much better today. The doctor said that he needs to recuperate well for a few days. Yes. Hao responded. "Uncle Ning, my elder brother will teach us. It's okay. Let great-grandfather recuperate well. When he is better, he will teach us." Yu said with a smile. "All right, if you have anything else, or if you need anything, feel free to look for me. Pan Ning said, exhorting them a few more times before leaving first. After he left, 17 also retreated to stand guard outside the courtyard. Inside the courtyard, Mu Qin looked at his eldest brother and asked, "Does he know?" At the side, Yu blinked her eyes and looked at them, quietly listening. Hao paused and said, "It doesn't matter if he knows or not. Let's just leave it at that." Even if he knew, he didn't have to say it out loud. Continue practicing. Hao looked at the two of them and said, "Go through the entire set of fish techniques today. I want to check tomorrow." After instructing the two of them and 17, he went back to his room and prepared to cultivate there. The two little fellows agreed and began to practice obediently. Not long after Pan Ning left, Bo Qing, Bowen, and Shua came to the south courtyard. Bowen and Shua were especially happy to know that their father wouldn't die. "Let's tell this good news to little sister Yu and the rest. They will definitely be very happy." Fu Qing grinned and said, "Today, my mother told me that great-grandfather's health is much better after knowing that uncle is fine." The three of them talked as they walked to the south courtyard. Just as they were about to enter, they were stopped by 17. Chapter 44-61. "Ah. Why?" "We have good news to tell them," Bo Qing said as he poked his head in, wanting to take a look, but was not allowed to take half a step forward. Hao and the other two had been staying with the Pan family for a few months, so Bowen also knew the rules of the south courtyard, so he said, "In that case, we won't go in. We'll come back later. But since we're already here, are we just going to leave like this?" Bo Qing rolled his eyes and suddenly shouted loudly, "Sister Yu, we're here to find you, but 17 won't let us in. Come out quickly." The two little guys who were practicing boxing heard the voice and looked at each other. Yu said, "Brother, it's Brother Bo Qing and the others." Mu Qin paused for a moment, thinking that his big brother was cultivating in the room and shouting like that was not a solution, so he said, "Let's go out and take a look, don't let him disturb big brother." "Okay." Yu nodded and followed him out of the courtyard. Because their parents were not by their side, they had to do a lot of things by themselves. Coupled with their big brother's guidance, although the two were young, they were not as naughty and playful as other children. Outside, Mu Qin glanced at Bo Qing and said, "Don't shout, it's too noisy." Fu Qing chuckled and ignored him. Instead, he smiled happily and said, "Let me tell you, my uncle won't die. The doctor said he won't die." "We know," Mu Qin said. "Ah. How did you know?" Bo Qing asked in surprise. Yu smiled and said, "Uncle Ning came just now, he told us." Yu looked at Bo Qing and said seriously, "Brother Bo Qing, next time you can't shout loudly outside this courtyard, you'll disturb my big brother." Bo Qing was a little embarrassed by her words and hurriedly promised, I won't next time, but 17 has been guarding this courtyard and won't let us in." Yu looked at him with a smile and said, "Because my big brother told 17 not to let anyone in. Big brother doesn't like to be disturbed, he'll get angry." Yes, I know. I won't do it again," he promised again. Bowen looked at the two of them and said, "Great-grandfather has to recuperate and can't teach us for a while. Do you want to study with us?" "No need, we'll just study in the south courtyard," Mu Qin said. "All right, then we'll head back first," Bowen said as he led Cher away. "Younger sister Yu, I'll come and find you again tomorrow." Shua turned around and waved her hand before leaving with her brother. "Then I'll be leaving too," Fu Qing said as she skipped away. After watching them leave, Mu Qin said, "Sister, let's go back." As he spoke, He took her hand and walked towards the courtyard. They were different from them. They had to cultivate well and work hard. Only then could they find the way back and find their parents. You agreed, then obediently returned back to continue her training. Chapter 4462. Their days in the Pan family passed day by day. During these days, Hao and the other two still cultivated on their own. During this time, the three of them went to see Pan Hong a few times and watched as his body recovered day by day. However, he could no longer stand up on his feet. On this day, Pan Ning came back from outside and went directly to the southern courtyard to find Hao and the other two. Today, I learned that the emperor issued an imperial edict to search for the traces of immortals. Now the imperial edict has been sent to various cities and towns. I heard that it was because an old man beside the emperor saw an immortal flying on a sword when he was young, so he had the idea of searching for immortals. As Pan Ning spoke, he looked at the calm faces of the three children. He paused for a moment and said, "There is one more thing. The emperor summoned me today and specifically asked if my brother had been given any immortal medicine." When he saw the three children looking at him, he hurriedly said, "I told him that no immortal medicine was used. However, I feel that he is a little suspicious. He thinks that there must be some inside story for my brother to survive such a serious injury." However, Hao didn't say anything about this. He only asked, he issued an imperial edict to search for immortals. Can it match the traces of cultivators? Pan Ning shook his head and said, "This is hard to say. After all, if immortals don't display immortal techniques, they look no different from ordinary people. People like us can't tell whether they are immortals or not." "Yes, are you sure you can't tell?" Hao nodded and agreed. After all, if they weren't immortal cultivators, they naturally couldn't sense the spiritual aura of immortal cultivators. But don't worry. If there is news, I will inform you immediately. Pan Ning looked at the three of them and said, "Thank you, Uncle Ning." You have thanked him with a smile. Pan Ning smiled. "You are welcome." He didn't disturb them and left after delivering the news. Once the news of the emperor's search for immortals spread, it could be said that the whole country was shocked. Many people were discussing whether immortals really existed in this world. What did immortals look like? In that remote village, the old village chief's man, who had heard the news, sat at the door and smoked a hookah. The two of them looked at each other and couldn't help but think of the scene from a few months ago. They thought of the three children. His Majesty's search for immortals said that anyone who discovered the whereabouts of immortals would be greatly rewarded. However, even if they heard that there would be a great reward, the two of them did not dare to reveal anything about what happened that day. That was an immortal, and an immortal who had saved them. Even though the three of them were still so young, they didn't dare to casually mention that matter. They were fortunate enough to meet an immortal in this lifetime, so this matter could only rot in their stomachs, never to be spoken of. As the days passed, some people became greedy and said that they had seen traces of immortals in the deep mountains and old forests. However, the emperor sent people to find traces of immortals. After finding out that there were people who were greedy, he immediately ordered them to be killed. For a time, those people who wanted to gamble with greed all stopped thinking about it. In the blink of an eye, a year passed. In another world, Xianyuan Mose and Fengzhou, who were looking for the three children, went to many places in this year's time, but they still couldn't find the whereabouts of the three children. Chapter 4463. Hearing her murmur, Xianyuan Mose followed her gaze. When his deep gaze fell on the little girl, there was a trace of absent-mindedness in his expression. It had been more than a year and the two children were almost 4 years old. He gathered his thoughts and hugged Fingzhou beside him, saying, "We've searched many regions and towns in this year and 4 months. Perhaps the children aren't far from us. The two little ones are almost 4 years old and Hao is almost 10 years old. I just don't know how they've changed these days. How much taller have they grown? Has their cultivation improved? Have they thought of us?" Fingzhou said softly. There was an indescribable sense of loss in her heart. "Let's find an inn to rest first. I'll go around the city and ask around to see if there's any news about them here," Xianyuan Mose said as he held her hand and walked towards the inn in front of them. Arriving at the inn, the two people who had booked a room were about to go upstairs when a surprised voice suddenly sounded. "Fingzhou." Hearing the voice, Xianyuan Mose and Fingzhou both stopped and looked back. With this look, their eyes couldn't help but flicker slightly. "Murong-Yishuan. Why are you here?" Fingzhou asked as she looked at the man who was sitting at the table in the corner drinking wine. That man was her former fiancé, Murong-Yishuan, whom she hadn't seen for a long time and had even almost forgotten in her memory. Murong-Yishuan was wearing a cyan-colored robe and his hair was loosely draped over his shoulders, covering half of his outstanding appearance. He had a beard on his chin which made him look less like an elegant immortal and more like a casual and unrestrained person. Compared to a few years ago, he had changed a lot. If he hadn't called out to Fingzhou, they probably wouldn't have noticed him in the corner. Murong-Yishuan walked over. After his gaze swept past Xianyuan Mose, it landed on Fingzhou. Looking at that face that still hadn't changed, his eyes flashed and he smiled. "I didn't expect to meet you here. Why don't we sit down and have a drink?" Fingzhou looked at Xianyuan Mose. Xianyuan Mose nodded and sat down with her at a table in the corner. After Murong-Yishuan saw the two of them sit down, he also sat down and poured a cup of wine for each of them. Only then did he say, "I came here because I was traveling around. After all, people like me don't have a fixed residence. It's not bad to wander around and see more of the local customs." He smiled and took a sip of wine. He looked at the two of them and asked, "What about you two? Why would you come to such a place?" Xianyuan Mose raised his glass and drank without saying a word. Fengzhou paused for a moment and said, "We came out to look for the child." "Look for the child?" Murong-Yishuan, who was drinking, was slightly startled. He looked at her and asked, "What do you mean?" "Our child is missing, so we came out to look for him," Fengzhou said slowly. Before he asked, she said, "When we were fighting with the Devil Master used the blood curse ancient array to send them away. We don't know where they are, so we came out to look for them and see if we can find them." Murong-Yishuan paused for a moment and said, "I've been wandering outside for too long and haven't been back for a long time. I don't know what happened over there. Why don't you tell me? How is the Devil Master now? Has the ancient Black Lotus been destroyed?" There wasn't anything that couldn't be said, so Fingzhou told him everything. Chapter 44-64. Seeing that the matter had been explained and the wine had been drunk, Xianyuan Mose stood up and said, "Ah Zhou, go and rest for a while." "All right." Fengzhou stood up and said to Murong-Yishuan, "We'll go and rest first." Murong-Yishuan also stood up and responded. After watching them go upstairs, he continued to sit down and drink. He didn't expect to meet Xianyuan Mose and Fengzhou here. He also didn't expect that so many things would happen after he left that familiar place to travel. Was the child missing? As he drank, he thought about it. He had been traveling around for the past few years. He couldn't go to some of the other powerful heaven realms with his strength, but he could come and go as he pleased in some of the smaller heaven realms. A thought arose in his mind. He finished the wine in his cup, paid the bill, and got up to leave. In the room on the second floor, Fengjiu took off his coat and rubbed his neck. He walked to the table and sat down, saying, "This Murong Yi Xian has changed a lot in the past few years. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have dared to connect him with that person in the past." Xianyuan Mose poured a cup of water for him and said, "Don't pay too much attention to irrelevant people. You should rest first. I've asked the waiter to prepare hot water. Take a hot bath and then go to sleep. You still want to go out?" Fengjiu looked at him and asked. "I'm going to walk around the city. I'll also take a trip to the city lord's residence." The world was so big that they couldn't search every place. Even if they were in a town, they couldn't search every house. So, every time they arrived at a place, they would walk around and greet the local city lord or other forces, asking them to pay more attention. "It's getting late. Why don't you rest for a while? We'll go out tomorrow," Fengjiu said. He didn't want him to be too tired. There was no one else by his side. He did a lot of things by himself. However, this way, he would be more tired physically and mentally. "It's okay. You rest first. I'll be back soon." "It won't be long," Xianyuan Mo said. Then, he heard the sound of the waiter knocking on the door. "Guest, here's the water. Come in," Xianyuan Mo said. The waiter came in with the water and placed the bath water in the corner of the washroom. After filling the basin with water, he left. "The water is ready. You go take a bath and relax. I'll be back in a while." Xianyuan Mose motioned for her to take a bath first. "All right, don't be gone for too long," Fengjiu said softly. After sending him out of the room, he locked the door and turned to take a bath in the inner room. Xianyuan Mose walked around the city alone. He didn't sense any familiar aura here. After all, the child had something they gave her. Even if the connection was cut off, as long as they were within a certain distance, he could still sense their presence. After asking for directions to the city lord's residence, he was about to go there when he saw Murong Yi Xian, whom he had met not long ago, trapped in a corner in an alley. Chapter 44-65. Ghost cultivators who could cultivate a physical body and dared to appear in the day were naturally powerful. However, he didn't know why there were so many ghost cultivators in this place. Moreover, it looked like they were here specifically for Murong Yishuan. He watched from the shadows for a while. The boundary formed by Yin Qi blocked the aura of the battle inside. Even though the alley was only about 10 meters away from the main street, the people outside the main street didn't know what was happening in the alley. Seeing that Murong Yishuan was dealing with more than 10 ghost cultivators alone, he didn't help him but watched as a bystander. After all, Murong Yishuan wasn't weak. Although more than 10 ghost cultivators were powerful, they wouldn't be able to take his life. After about the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the boundary formed by Yin Qi broke apart with the death of more than 10 ghost cultivators. Murong Yishuan, whose robes were cut with several wounds, walked out. As if he sensed something, he looked in a certain direction. However, he didn't see anything. He paused for a moment, then turned around and left. After he left, Xianyuan Mose walked out from the shadows. After watching him leave, he also headed in the direction of the city lord's residence. In the evening, when Xianyuan Mose returned to the inn, Fengjiu had already fallen asleep. However, he opened his eyes when he heard the sound of his return. "You're back?" Fengjiu asked. His voice carried a hint of sleepiness. "I'm back," Xianyuan Mose responded and said, "I went out for a walk today and found that this small place isn't very peaceful. Oh. What happened? Fengjiu asked as he sat up from the bed. I saw more than 10 ghost cultivators who dared to appear in the day. They weren't weak. However, they were all killed by Murong Ishuan in the end. He poured a cup of water and drank as he spoke slowly. Hearing this, Fengjiu was slightly surprised. How did he provoke those ghost cultivators? A ghost cultivator who has materialized a physical body and dares to appear in the daytime is not simple. It seems that his cultivation has also improved in the past few years of training outside. When I went to the City Lord Manor, I heard the City Lord mention that there's a ghost king in the Yin Mountain area. He has many ghost cultivators under him, and he often comes out to do evil. When I came back just now, the aura in the city had changed slightly, and many shops had closed their doors. Xianyuan Mose said as he played with the teacup in his hand. His eyes flashed as he thought of the scene he saw when he came back. Hearing this, Fengjiu's eyes flashed slightly. He lifted the blanket and got out of bed, putting on his clothes, and said, "This small place is also like this? Then I really have to go and take a look." She smiled and said, "I've also slept for a while. Now that I've heard you say that, I'm not sleepy anymore. How about this? I'll go out and take a look. You rest first. You want to deal with the Ghost King?" Xianyuan Mose raised his eyebrows and looked at her. "Since we've encountered it, how can we leave it alone?" Fengjiu said slowly, taking light steps to his side, and said, "We have the strength, so we can naturally take care of it. If we don't, wouldn't we be allowing the Ghost King to harm the people?" Actually, she was thinking that whether it was the ghost cultivators or the Ghost King, leaving them alive would be a great disaster. If she didn't eliminate this threat, if one day, her children came to this place, with their innate spiritual bodies, wouldn't they be targeted by the Ghost King and the ghost cultivators? Chapter 44-66. I'll go with you. As Xianyuan Mose spoke, he smirked and said, "I knew it. If you knew, you would definitely go." Even if she didn't say it, he could vaguely guess what she was thinking. Seeing this, Fengjiu smiled and didn't say anything more. He just replied softly, "Okay." When night fell, the two were ready to leave the inn. The waiter of the inn saw that they were going out and reminded them, "Sir, all the houses in the city close early to rest at night. If you go out now, there won't be many people on the street." "It's okay." Fengjiu smiled. "But it's not safe at night." Before the waiter could finish his words, the two had already left the inn and walked towards the street. Seeing this, he shook his head and sighed. Accidents often happened at night in the city. Some were children, some were women, and some were cultivators. Over time, the people in the city knew that it was best not to walk around at night. Only some foreigners didn't know and didn't listen to advice. Those two were so outstanding. He was afraid that they wouldn't be able to come back this time. Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu walked on the street. On both sides of the street, the lanterns in front of the shops swayed in the night wind. They also saw that in the dark of the street, there were ghosts floating around. They wanted to get close to them, but after several failed attempts, they quietly retreated and followed them from afar. There are also cultivators in this place. How can they let these ghosts make trouble here? Fengjiu frowned slightly and glanced around. Then, he raised his hand and the two cloud-swallowing beasts, White Tiger and White, jumped out. "Master!" The contract beasts surrounded him and called. "Go, clear the ghosts in the city." Fengjiu said lightly and glanced at the ghosts who were flying around and escaping quickly. If Qin and Yu were here, with their innate spiritual bodies, wouldn't they be targeted by these ghosts? Thinking of the ghost that targeted Yu last time, a cold light flashed in his eyes. Yes. The contracted beasts replied and leaped into the air, chasing in different directions. The two children have the magical treasures we gave them. Ordinary ghosts and ghosts can't get close to them. Xianyuan Mose held her hand and said, "Don't worry too much. They'll be fine. If I don't see them return safely with my own eyes, how can I be at ease?" Fengzhou said softly as he looked ahead. He only hoped that they would be able to turn the misfortune into a blessing, and that they would have the help of a benefactor. That night, all the Yin souls in the city were wiped out by Fengzhou's contracted beasts. That night, the Ghost King, who had occupied the mountain, was annihilated by Xianyuan Mose and Fengzhou. Almost none of the ghost cultivators under them who were in Yin Mountain survived. After wiping out the Ghost King and the ghost cultivators in Yin Mountain, Fengzhou burned Yin Mountain for 3 full days with heaven fire. After completely removing the Yin Qi in the mountain, they quietly left the area. As for the people in the city, they only knew that an inexplicable fire had burned Yin Mountain for a total of 3 days. They had no idea what had happened there. Only the city lord of the city had rushed over to take a look when he heard the news, and then he bowed respectfully to the heavens 3 times. Chapter 44-67. 17, who was standing guard outside the courtyard, looked at the small figure sitting cross-legged on the roof. He paced back and forth nervously, looking at the roof from time to time. Faintly, he seemed to feel that there was something different in the air. This was the same aura as when he saw young Master Hao killing people with his sword in the dilapidated courtyard. Due to the location of the south courtyard and Pan Ning's instructions, the secret guards in the residence did not come over to check even though they noticed the commotion. After all, they knew that 17 was guarding the south courtyard. In the room of the southern courtyard, Mu Chen and Mu Yu were sleeping soundly. However, when they sensed the fluctuation of the spiritual aura, the two quickly got out of bed and opened the door to go outside. Looking up, they saw their big brother sitting cross-legged on the roof, bathed in the moonlight. "Young Master Qin, miss you, why didn't you put on your outer clothes?" 17 saw them and quickly went into the room to help them put on their outer clothes. "It's okay, it's not cold." Yu smiled and looked up at the roof. "Brother, is elder brother about to break through?" "I'm not sure." Mu Chen shook his head and looked up nervously. On the roof, Hao only felt a crack coming from a certain part of his body, as if something had split open. In an instant, the sealed spiritual aura gushed out and went to his dantian. Sweat seeped out of his forehead. In his mind, scenes appeared as his body broke through. The past that he could not remember, the blurry things, finally became clear at this moment. Just as his spiritual aura surged, a ray of light flashed from his body and leaped into the air. A whoa! A wolf howl soared into the sky. The sound echoed in the night and spread throughout the imperial city. Hiss! Wolf, wolf! 17 was shocked and her eyes widened. She did not expect that a huge snow-white silver wolf would jump out of young Master Hao's body. How did he do it? How could there be a wolf living in his body? The moment the wolf howled, Hao suddenly opened his eyes. Light flashed in his eyes and he regained his usual vigor. At this moment, his spiritual energy and aura had returned to normal. The aura that radiated from this little boy who was not even 10 years old was very intimidating. Mu Chen and Mu Yu looked at their eldest brother in surprise, as well as the majestic silver wolf that jumped into the air and landed steadily on the roof. Their eyes were full of surprise. Hao raised his hand and stroked the silver wolf beside him. A faint smile appeared on his cold little face. "You're finally out, Master." Silver Wolf called out and lowered its head slightly to look at Mu Chen and Mu Yu below. When it saw the two of them, Wolf Yin's gaze softened a little. They were the two children of the master it had once wanted to follow. Ever since the battle with the Devil Master, it had fallen into a deep slumber. Now that it had woken up and saw them together, it was relieved. Hao gently jumped down from the roof. The silver wolf followed suit and landed steadily beside him. Chapter 4468. Young Master Hao, don't worry. I understand. He quickly bowed and said. You may leave. Hao said, reaching out to lead Mu Qin and Mu Yu back to the room, followed by the silver wolf. After watching them enter the room, 17 couldn't help but wipe away the cold sweat on his forehead. He took a deep breath and turned to leave. After a while, 2 shadow guards came in. 17, is there anything strange here? The 2 shadow guards asked, looking around. 17's eyes flashed and asked, what's strange? Didn't you hear the wolf howl? The wolf howl was very loud just now, almost the entire capital heard it. Also, we seem to have seen a snow-white wolf leaping into the air and disappearing in the blink of an eye. No, I didn't see it, but I did hear a wolf howl. Maybe it came from outside. 17 quickly said. Then you guard the southern courtyard wall. We'll go check out other places. It's not normal for a wolf howl to appear in the middle of the night. The 2 shadow guards said and quickly left. In the Pan household, Old Master Pan and Old Master Pan got up in the middle of the night. They put on their coats and went out the door, looking at the night sky with confusion and surprise. Because they also heard the wolf howl. How could there be a wolf howl in the capital, under the imperial city? This was too strange. When Pan Hong heard the wolf howl, he called for someone to inquire about it. After learning about the situation, he leaned against the head of the bed, looking thoughtful. Pan Ning's heart jumped when he heard the wolf howl. He put on his coat and went out the door, calling for the shadow guards to inquire about it. He stood in the courtyard and looked at the night sky, his eyes moving slightly. In the capital, under the imperial city, the wolf howl spread to almost every corner. Inexplicably, his heart skipped a beat and he vaguely thought of something. He raised his foot and wanted to take a step, but in the end, he didn't put it down. That night, it wasn't just the Pan family who heard the wolf howls. The emperor in the imperial palace, as well as the various aristocratic families in the imperial capital, were all astonished. No one could understand why there would be a wolf howl right under the feet of the emperor, which was usually heard deep in the mountains and forests. Compared to everyone's surprise and contemplation. That night, Hao, Mu Qin, and Mu Yu chatted in the room for the whole night. The lights in the room were also on all night. It was not until dawn that Hao returned to the room, and Mu Qin and Mu Yu went to sleep. They slept until noon before waking up. Fu Qing, who had been waiting outside the courtyard for the whole morning, with both hands under his chin. From time to time, he looked at the quiet courtyard, and then at 17, who was guarding outside the courtyard, and asked, 17, did they sleep last night? Why are they sleeping so late? Usually, they would be awake at this time. I don't know. 17 said and shook her head. Teat. Why are you guys here? Fu Qing turned around and looked at them in surprise. You guys didn't go to class today. Great-grandfather told us to practice writing and memorize books by ourselves. After we finished practicing, my father said that he would bring us to the city to play. Therefore, my brother and I came over to call little sister Yu, and the others. Teat. Chapter 4469. They haven't woken up yet. Bowen looked at 17 in surprise. Usually, they should be up by this time. Are they sick? Did you go in to take a look? 17 hurriedly said, no, they slept late last night. Fu Qing heard this and pouted unhappily. He stood up and put his hands on his waist. 17, when I asked you just now, why did you say you didn't know? This point 17 sighed softly and said, young Master Hao told me not to disturb them before they wake up, so. He had been by their side for more than a year and understood their living habits. Fu Qing was more mischievous, so he didn't plan to tell him much. Fu Qing snorted. You're bullying me because I'm young. I'm going to tell my father. Fu Qing, they haven't woken up yet. It looks like we can't go. Do you want to come with us to play? Bowen asked and looked at Fu Qing beside him. Yes, I'll go with you. When he heard that they were going to play, he immediately smiled. I'll go memorize when I get back. Otherwise, if I can't memorize it tomorrow, great-grandfather will hit me. Half a year ago, Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu stopped reading and writing with them because they could always memorize their books after just one look. They learned things quickly and their great-grandfather praised them for being smart. They didn't need to learn how to read and write anymore. He didn't go to school to study. Hao, and the other two didn't go out to play either. They stayed in the courtyard all day and didn't know what they were doing. They also rarely went out. If he didn't come to play with them, they wouldn't have gone to play with them. Brother Bowen, Brother Fu Qing, Sister Shui, why are you here? Shui, was wearing a pink dress as she skipped out of the room, followed by Mu Qin, who was wearing a white robe. You're awake. Fu Qing saw them and happily ran forward. Mu Chen, you, my father wants to take us out to play. Do you want to go together? Bowen asked as he looked at the two little guys. Yu looked at her brother and asked, Brother, are we going? Her little face was full of anticipation. Ask Big Brother, Mu Qin said. Just after he spoke, Yu ran to the door of her big brother's room and shouted, Big Brother, Big Brother, Big Brother Bowen asked us to go out and play together, should we go? The tender voice was filled with anticipation. Hao, who was in the room, heard this and his lips curled up slightly. He put on his belt and walked out. Go. Hao opened the door and looked at his sister in front of him. He patted her little head and said, I haven't been out for a long time. It's good to go out for a walk. All right, I'll go talk to my father first. You guys can come later. Bowen smiled and turned to leave. 17, go to the kitchen and get some pastries. Hao instructed as he looked at 17. Yes. 17 responded and quickly turned to leave. Let's go to the front. My father is in the front yard. Shui held Yu's hand and walked forward with a smile. Behind them, Mu Chen and Fu Qing followed, and Hao walked at the back. In the front yard, Pan Hong sat in a wheelchair and was talking to Pan Ning while Bowen stood quietly to the side. Father, second uncle. Shui greeted them with a smile when she saw them. Chapter 4470. Pan Hong and Pan Ning looked at the children. Although their children were not bad-looking, they were easily outshone when compared to Hao, and the other two. In fact, they had long known about this. It was just that today, the difference seemed even more obvious. Hao was obviously different from usual. There seemed to be an indescribable feeling in his body and his gaze. I don't have anything to do today, so I'll go out with you. We can take 2 carriages. Pan Ning smiled and looked at the children. Is there anywhere you want to go today? Father, I want to pick peaches. They said there is a large peach tree behind the Emperor Temple, and there are peaches to pick now. Bo Qing quickly said. Oh. Who said that? Pan Ning raised an eyebrow at his son. The servants in the residence said so. The Emperor Temple is a little far from here. It's getting late if we go now. He looked at the sky and said, moreover, if we go now, we may not be able to make it back tonight. We can stay in the Emperor Temple. Since the children like it, we can stay there for the night and come back tomorrow. Pan Hong smiled and looked at his brother. Moreover, the Emperor Temple is quiet. I haven't been there for a long time, so it's a good time to take a look. Pan Ning thought for a moment and said, since Big Brother has said so, then let's go. I'll let Father and the others know. You all get in the carriage first. That's great. Bo Qing jumped up in excitement. Bowen also had a happy smile on his face. Shua smiled as she leaned into her father's embrace. Picking peaches. You blinked and looked at Hao Big Brother, I seem to remember picking peaches before. Hao heard and nodded. Yes, you did. Their mother had a large peach forest. Mu Chen also thought about it. It seemed that such a scene had appeared in his memory, but he could not remember it clearly. Pan Hong looked at the three of them and smiled. Let's go. We'll get in the carriage first. He raised his hand and a guard came out from behind to help him push the wheelchair. There were some things that he might not understand, but he could vaguely guess. However, since he didn't say anything, then he would just pretend that he didn't know. The two carriages were accompanied by 12 guards. There were also 8 secret guards protecting them in the dark. The carriages passed through the city and headed towards the Emperor Temple. In the carriage behind them, Fu Qing, Bowen, Shuai, and Pan Hong were in the same carriage. At this moment, Fu Qing was pouting with an unhappy expression. Uncle, why didn't my father let me ride in the same carriage as him? He looked at Pan Hong, who was drinking tea, and asked. Pan Hong took a sip of tea and asked, don't you like sitting in the same carriage as eldest uncle? Or do you dislike Bowen and Shuai? Hearing this, the two people beside him looked at him. Seeing this, Bo Qing hurriedly waved his hand. No, I don't dislike uncle, nor do I dislike brother Bowen and Shuai. Since that's the case, you can sit with us. After all, if you go over, it'll be too crowded over there. It won't be comfortable sitting there, Pan Hong said unhurriedly. Is that so? Fu Qing scratched his head. In the end, he could only give up. Chapter 44-71. Hearing this, Mu Chen and Mu Yu, who were eating, paused and looked at Pan Ning. Hao paused for a moment before asking, is the news reliable? How can you be sure that the other party is a cultivator? He had recovered his memory. Even though he was still young, he had become more cautious in handling matters. This place belonged to the mortal world. In this mortal world, whether it was power or money, neither were things that cultivators sought. Even if a cultivator really came to this place, he should not have shown himself in front of others. Therefore, when he heard that he had traces of an immortal and even invited him back to the imperial capital, he only had doubts in his heart. I haven't seen him yet. I guess we will only know in a few days. Pan Ning said and looked at Hao, asking, do you suspect that person is not an immortal? Hao shook his head and said, this place belongs to the mortal world. Generally, cultivators will not come here, unless they are traveling. But if that is the case, they will not appear in front of others and let everyone know. I understand. I will pay more attention to this matter. I will tell you after I find out more. Pan Ning nodded and said. The carriage moved slowly. Along the way, there was constant laughter in the carriage. The children sitting in the carriage lifted the curtain from time to time and looked at the scenery along the road. They continued until they arrived at the gate of the Emperor Temple. Come down quickly. We are here. Pan Ning got off the carriage first. After carrying you down, he saw Mu Chen lightly jump off the carriage, followed by Hao. Daddy. Fu Qing jumped down from behind like a little monkey and came to his side in a few steps. Daddy, are we staying here tonight? He grabbed his father's hand with one hand and looked at the majestic Buddhist place with curiosity in his eyes. When we go in later, we will first pay a visit to the abbot of the temple and then take you around. Pan Ning said with a smile and patted his head. We will stay here tonight. We will go back tomorrow afternoon. On the other side, after the guards helped Pan Hong off the carriage, they pushed the wheelchair towards the gate. Pan Hong shouted at them, let's go. Qing, you, Mu Chen, don't run around, follow me closely. Pan Ning told them not to run around, and then led them inside. Bowen and Shui followed beside their father's wheelchair. Not long after they entered the door, they saw the abbot, who was over 60 years old, walking slowly towards them with a few young monks. Amitabha, good indeed. The abbot bowed to Pan Hong and Pan Ning and softly chanted the name of Buddha. His gaze swept past the children and landed on Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu behind them. With just a glance, a bright light flashed through his wise eyes. He smiled and put his palms together, bowing again. I didn't know it was an honored guest. Forgive me for not going out to meet you. Hearing this, Pan Hong's eyes flashed slightly. He turned slightly and his gaze fell on Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu. Pan Ning was also a little surprised. It was said that the abbot of the Emperor Temple had a discerning eye. He didn't expect that he could see that Hao, and the other two were not ordinary at a glance. He smiled and bowed, putting his palms together and saying that they were honored guests. His gaze swept past them and landed on Hao, Mu Chen, and Mu Yu. It was so obvious that they naturally could see it. Chapter 44-72. He had been intelligent since he was a child and was personally taught by his great-grandfather. His temperament was naturally different. However, he was still young and there were many things he could not understand. Hao stood there quietly, neither arrogant nor humble. He looked at the abbot calmly and did not speak. As for Mu Chen, he pursed his lips and glanced at the old monk. His gaze fell on his bald head, and no one knew what he was thinking. Yu, on the other hand, was all smiles. Her pair of beautiful eyes curved into crescents, and her face had a pure and innocent smile. Great Master Huizhen, it has been many years since we last met. You are still as energetic as ever. Pan Hong broke the silence with a smile. Heh, young master, this old servant is looking forward to playing a few more games with you. He revealed a kind smile, and his gaze turned from the three children to Pan Hong. Of course I am looking forward to playing chess with you. He smiled and said, Great Master, this is my second brother, Pan Ning. Today, he brought a few children to disturb you. Greetings, Great Master Abbot. Pan Ning quickly bowed. The abbot looked at Pan Ning and smiled. Second Master, you are indeed a man of great fortune. Since the Emperor Temple has welcomed you today, I dare not neglect you. As he spoke, he ordered the little monk beside him, clean up the east wing for our guests. Yes, the little monk replied and gestured for them to enter. Then I will bring the children over first. Pan Ning said. After bowing to the abbot, he left with the children. After they left, the abbot said to Pan Hong, "Eldest master, this way please." Then, he walked slowly. The guards pushed Pan Hong beside him. The two were like old friends who had known each other for many years. They chatted as they walked until they arrived at a quiet courtyard. The little monk left and so did the guards. Only the abbot and Pan Hong were left in the large courtyard. On the stone table, there was a chessboard and a pot of tea. It was elegant and quiet. Pan Hong sighed. Today, when we meet again, Great Master is still the same. But I am sitting in this wheelchair and will never be able to stand up again. In less than 2 years, I have experienced the ups and downs of this world. The host poured 2 cups of tea and said with a smile, "Everything is predestined. Young master, there is no need to sigh." He placed the chess piece in front of him and said, "Come, let's see if eldest young master's chess skills have improved after not seeing him for a few years." Hearing this, Pan Hong smiled, picked up a chess piece, and slowly placed it down. On the other side, Pan Ning took the children and followed the little monk to the eastern courtyard. After resting for a while, he took the children to the peach forest behind the mountain. At the same time, in the Hall of Great Strength, a beautiful woman in luxurious clothes was kneeling and praying. She was praying in her heart. After a while, she slowly stood up. The maidservant at the side hurriedly came forward to help her. She personally went forward to add incense. When the monk at the side saw this, he said, "If you are feeling depressed, why don't you take a walk in the peach forest at the back of the mountain?" Peach forest. The beautiful woman was stunned. After thinking for a while, she said, "Okay." She gently bowed and turned to leave the hall. She went to the peach forest at the back of the mountain. At this time, in the peach forest, there were pink and tender peaches on the peach trees. They looked very pleasing. After Pan Ning took the children into the peach forest, the children laughed and played on their own like caged birds. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.